Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Power Her Africa series. This is our series where we hang out with different women from different walks of life who are making an impact across the continent, be it in the educational space, from a government and civil society perspective, from corporate, or from a startup and entrepreneurship network space. My name is Nziki Mkize, and I will be your host for today. I'm the founder of Mentor, which is a global mentorship network supporting female social entrepreneurs. And I'm excited to be facilitating our conversation for today, looking at artificial intelligence. And we're asking the question, what does that mean for your future? So if you are looking at this wave of AI as it sits within the fourth industrial revolution, and you're asking yourself, where do I fit? What should I be doing with my business? What should my organization be doing? We're going to aim at answering a few of those questions today, but also putting the lens on women in those spaces and looking at, where do some of the gender gaps exist and how do we begin to bridge those. This event series would not be possible without the partnership of Seed South Capital as well as Women in Tech. So I'd like to welcome to our virtual stage Nadia and Melissa to share with us the function or the purpose of this event, but also some of the key things that they are doing in their respective spaces to empower women in tech and female entrepreneurs. Welcome, Nadia. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Nsiki. So, Women Power Africa is a collaboration between Women Tech and Seed South Capital. Seed South Capital is a early stage venture fund. We focus on early stage startups, but also the commercialization of IP coming out of R&D or universities. And why Melissa and I thought this was such a great collaboration is I'm sure everybody's seen the statistics when it comes to venture capital. It is poor when it comes to funding of women. Less than 1% of women are getting funding in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa specifically, and 60% of the entrepreneurs are women. So we decided to create a platform for women to converse across, so not in silos, just converse across university, government, entrepreneurship, and startup, and then hopefully also find the female founders that we look to fund in future.
Thank you so much, Nadia, and thank you for Natiki for the introduction. So I'm Melissa Slaymaker from Women in Tech South Africa. We are a part of the global movement of more women in technology. We need more funding for technology, and we need to get more of our youth excited.
Thank you so much. We look forward to bringing you back on to share with us how people can get involved. I know people are streaming in from YouTube and from LinkedIn as well, so please feel free to share comments, ask your questions to our panel and to the network that is here. And a big part of what we do here is also to connect people. So if you are working on an exciting initiative and you're looking for somebody to help fly the banner for you in a certain context, or you're looking for someone to partner with, please do put out that call to action. And you never know who is in the room virtually or in the chat that would be able to assist. I had a meeting earlier on speaking to a young lady in tech, and we were going back and forth, just sharing ideas on how do you create social impact initiatives from a tech perspective and a blockchain perspective. And we were, coloring in and coloring outside the lines. And she said to me that she initially started out her career studying BSc in computer tech. And then she told me that she dropped out of her course. And the reason why she dropped out was because she realized that the rate of innovation was moving a lot faster than what the university curriculum was. And so she had then gone out and studied everything she needed to know in real time as it was happening. So I thought that was very interesting. So I'm looking forward to hearing the interesting backgrounds and the colorful perspectives of our panelists, which I'd like to welcome and introduce to you. So joining us is Lavina Ramikson, and she is a conscious creator. She's a non-executive director and advisor with expertise in AI, blockchain, financial services, and telecoms. Welcome to Lavina. Joining us as well is Megan Yates. She is the co-founder of Zindi, which is a tech startup based in Cape Town, in South Africa, that's focused on data science. And previously, she was also co-founder of a company called I want to say Clio because I speak it's Xhosa, right? But I'm going to assume that maybe it's IXIO or something like that. But she'll tell us about that later on. So welcome, Megan. And then finally, our last panelist is Nicole Kubenalia. I hope I said that correctly. And she is the current acting CEO for MLab South Africa. She's also a technology innovation professional with specialties in intellectual asset management, technology transfer and commercialization, business incubation, business optimization, strategy and business case development, innovation, and coaching. And if I put all three of these ladies together, their experience, their networks, I know it's going to be a rich conversation. So welcome and thank you so much for making the time to join us. And I imagine people are wondering, how did you get to where you are in your career? So I'd like to give each of you an opportunity just to share with us, what do you do exactly in your current role? And I think when people think about AI, they might not know exactly what the office function is. So what do you do in your current role? How did you get there? And who was a mentor that you can think of that was instrumental in your process? So I will start with Lavina, who I introduced first. Welcome, Lavina.
Wow, thank you so much for having me. So, brilliant question. My journey has been not a traditional journey, not at all. So, started off finishing my high school years, deciding what to do. Got accepted with a bursary for psychology and decided to turn it down because I came across this cool new field called business computer science. And I thought, fantastic, let me rather do that. And that is kind of where my curiosity for tech really started. But funny enough, as life has full circles, I actually came back to finish off my psychology degree 20 years later when I got into the field of AI, because I thought, okay, I have tech, I have psychology. Now, what do I do with these two worlds? And that's when I really started entering into AI. So the field and the journey, I guess, for anyone out there is just be curious and follow that. That pretty much leads you to exactly where you need to be. In terms of role models, I think 25 years ago we didn't have many role models in the space, especially female role models. So for me, my first job that I had was through an Australian university, and I was fortunate enough to have a mentor who was my manager, and that really helped shape my curiosity and my playing field. So within that arena, I managed to get a good exploration around all the different fields within technology. And, that really helped me decipher where I kind of wanted to fit myself into.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Lavina. And I think it's so great to have mentors who are also managers who see the potential in you, who inspire you to do more and also help you to get to the ultimate end goal and destination. So thank you so much for sharing your journey and how that has come full circle. Megan, welcome.
Thank you. My journey, I guess, grew up in a very kind of scientific household. My dad was a geologist, so learned a lot about how things work and I guess just a lot of curiosity about the world around us. I went on to study eventually evolutionary biology and started getting very frustrated with just a lot of theoretical work. I wanted to do something that really had some impact, some practical kind of outcome. So I decided to go and get a job, and I had my first job in Johannesburg, and immediately saw that businesses were in such dire need of data skills and really were struggling with, understanding things. I had done some machine learning and coding through my studies, and I just saw a huge opportunity. And went into this AI machine learning world, started working with a lot of companies, got some really cool results with, how we use data to change outcomes for businesses. But through that, saw a lot of issues with talent and I guess through the consulting work, we decided to build Zindi, which is a community of data practitioners. But I think, I've always had this curiosity about my world and, how I can use data to really change and drive change. I suppose my mentor was definitely my dad, I guess, in that science realm. But I would say over time, I found more and more mentors that were women in the space.
That's great. Thank you so much, Megan. And I think it's always great to continue to build and to find your tribe as you grow in the space that you choose to specialize in. Nikki, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be amongst these women on the panel. I actually have a chemistry background, studied chemistry and worked in a research laboratory and found it quite isolating, actually. And so soon left that role and moved into research management and investment in research, and then found my way to a small business incubator where I just fell in love with working with new businesses, working with young entrepreneurs. But having come from a research background, I think one of the things I realized was missing in many of these new businesses was really strong intellectual property that would enable them to scale and grow. And so I felt that I could play a brokerage role in ensuring that research that gets developed in the lab actually finds a match with entrepreneurs, etc., who would then actually take that to market. Because one of the things we also find that's a huge challenge is we do a lot of R&D, but many of those solutions don't actually end up in the market. And so I found myself playing this brokerage role between developing technologies in the lab and actually ensuring that it gets transferred and commercialized, and particularly through setting up new businesses. I am now the CEO at MLab, which is a digital skills, new business and technology accelerator. We work with a lot of youth, mainly based in rural communities, to help improve either their employability through our coding programs, or to really help them build a minimal viable product through their new businesses to actually prove it very early on in the market. And so I'm probably one of those non-techie techies that has now landed in a very digital and computer-driven space. But I hope that I can be an example to others who are scared about artificial intelligence, just think, no, leave it to the software developers and engineers. And like one of you was saying earlier, we have to be hungry and curious, because artificial intelligence is going to take over the world. And we need to be asking those questions. We need to understand it. And so I suppose in a way, I am the way I am because I was fortunate to have mentors who allowed me to be curious, to ask the silly questions, and to really kind of test the status quo. Why are we doing things the way we normally do? And so I'm very excited to be in this space now because it really is top of mind for many people.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I love the trailblazing aspect of it, that you can really walk into a space, learn about the space, and then dominate the space. And I think that's the messaging that all women joining us need to take away. And speaking of women joining us, I'd like to say hi to everyone who's joined. I see your comments coming through. So we've got Zadia, who's joining us, Roshana, who's joining from Germany, Jessica, who's joining from Nigeria, Maria, who's washing dishes in Colorado. Welcome. Christopher's in Portugal, Ritavila's in South Africa. We have Aliyah, who's in Cameroon, Renee, who's in the United States, Isabella, who's in Brazil, and Samia, who is from Morocco, who's Moroccan, but is currently living in Canada, and Mansi, who's joining us from India. So welcome from across all your different time zones. It's so exciting to see you in the chat sections. Please do share your comments, share your questions, and exciting projects that you are working on. So let's jump into AI. Megan, I think I'll come to you for this one, considering that you are in that startup space, so you understand the anxiety that entrepreneurs face, right? What is AI? How can you demystify it for women who are wanting to go into the tech space and be entrepreneurs in the tech space?
Thanks, Nsiki. I think to put it like very simply, it's basically getting computers to do tasks that we would consider human tasks. So, as an example, how do we teach a computer to look at images and identify birds, as a very plain example? And this is obviously hugely powerful because we can use it in, almost, I would say, almost every application. But as a way to make us better humans, I think that there's often this scariness around AI, but I see it really as empowering us, improving what we do, improving what doctors do. I think it's got huge potential to just actually, make us better, I would say. But it's really teaching computers to do human tasks, and it's like, obviously it cuts across every single industry, everything we do in our daily lives. So I think, when people talk about AI taking over, it really has the potential to do that, because it really can play in so many different areas.
That's so true, and it does have various applications. And I think, Nikki, I want to ask you this question. Working with MLab and the different entrepreneurs there, and teaching entrepreneurs how to get into the tech space. What do you see the various applications for AI being, specifically in an African context, and how that could radically transform what the future of Africa looks like?
As Megan just mentioned, artificial intelligence is such an enabling technology. It's meant to help with automation, improving productivity, lowering costs, etc. And so it really can be applied in fields such as agriculture. Agriculture is so important for us in Africa. How do we use it to monitor fields and farming and crops and soil? How do we use it in healthcare? We know that there's such a disease burden. So in education, we know that education is also such a big priority for us. And so really what we can do is look at all the different domains or sectors that we are involved in, whether it's manufacturing as well, and explore how does artificial intelligence actually improve our efficiencies, lower our costs. And I think one of the underpinning things that's important for artificial intelligence is about collection of data, right? And so that's one of the things we really encourage all our entrepreneurs with is, just start thinking out the box. You might not be involved in artificial intelligence, but the business you are busy building surely must be collecting data. And so just think strategically about what you're collecting, and then start exploring. For instance, can you use artificial intelligence to start analyzing this data, identifying trends, and then identifying niches where you can actually start building a competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point, because in the nature of doing business, in every interaction that we have, data is always being collected. And I think when we step back and think about it strategically, one can start to see the various connections that exist, and how you can start connecting the dots to create greater impact, or to leverage even the technology that exists to create efficiencies within your business or your networks or your ecosystem, or people that you serve. Lavina, I want to come to you. I like the full cycle story that you told around your studies, and kind of leaving one space and coming back to it later on. And I'm just wondering, for people who go, okay, that sounds great, but do I need to study this thing, right? And I think that's the challenge a lot of people often face, that parents are like, go to university, get a degree, be qualified in this thing. And then when it comes to AI and blockchain and robotics, it's like, it's happening so quick, and not all universities necessarily have those qualifications. If somebody's wanting to carve out a path for themselves in this space, a career journey for themselves in this space, what are some key things that they should consider, and what could that potentially look like?
Awesome question. So, I would really encourage everyone to, get immersed into each of the different arenas. For example, in AI, let's unpack that. So, we have different areas that one can go into. whether that be from a managerial position all the way down to, the actual coding. So, immerse yourself and get really familiar with what's actually required. Because what I found is I started off understanding the technical aspects, and then gravitated very much into the strategic end of it. And that kind of really helps. So when you're starting off as a developer, understand what is the key language that you think is going to be applicable for AI as a base language. So way back when in the day, for me, it was assembly code, machine code language, right? Assembly language 8080, which was something that I was first introduced into, and now I would probably recommend people to probably use Python as that medium of entry point, for coding. And, as you gravitate into the different arenas, whether it's the data science, as everyone spoke about, or whether it is around, the actual requirements end of it and the application side of it. There's also something that I'm involved in called AI ethics, and that becomes a huge portion in terms of driving an actual outcome. AI is something that I think can be applied in so many different aspects throughout your organization. So whether you're in HR, whether you find yourself in finance, or, in just daily operations, I think it is, again, there's always ways to bring about automation. But more so than the automation, I would say that it is also something that we should view as an extension of our own intelligence. That becomes, really key, because that's when we start taking ownership and we start really, taking on that human sort of approach to it. So yeah, very various many aspects to it. Similarly, we could apply it to robotics and, metaverses, AR, VR, and the rest of it. So yeah, I would just say, take some time, attend webinars, go ahead and meet people. I think post-pandemic, everybody is really open to digital, engagements and meeting. So that is something that has become way more accessible. And also join the community, because I found that, community kind of really drives a huge focus at the end in terms of understanding where you want to fit in. So off the bat, no, we don't need to know where we fit in, not at all. But, it's about just placing yourself in the environment and figuring that out.
Thanks, Lavina. And I always like to find tweetables, so I hope people will go and tweet this one, that to think about AI as an extension of our own intelligence. I think that's fabulous. And what you were saying now responds really well to Estefania. She was asking, how can I get into technology with no previous experience in the field? And I think your illustration, Lavina, on looking at it as an entire continuum, to say that whatever your expertise is an interface between that and AI, and that's sort of where you can start, and also go into communities and figure out where the need is and where you can plug yourself in. There's a nice response here from Veronica, and she was saying you can also simply just start by learning about the different IT certificates that you might want to earn and figure out who is offering that. And then there's a comment as well from, okay, and then somebody else was just saying that they started using Google Fundamentals, and I think those are all great introductions. I want to pose this to each of you. The lovely thing about connecting with people who work in this space is that they have a depth of knowledge of what's actually happening compared to the rest of us who are kind of looking in on the inside and probably don't realize how far ahead the developments in AI are. But across the board, whether it's governments, whether it's corporates, do you have any examples of who is doing AI really well, especially from a perspective of introducing women and taking women along with them, but also being mindful of using AI to support the development of, and growth of not just Africa, but I think other emerging and developing nations around the world? And I'll leave that open to anybody who'd like to take a nab at that first.
I can take that one first. Okay. So we've worked with an organization in Kenya, actually, and they're a logistics company moving parcels around, and they used Zindi to build a machine learning algorithm for them that they have in production, but they've also built an incredible very female focused data team, which is just so awesome to see. I think they've made it really inclusive, to make females part of the team. I think, we often come across organizations with like very male dominated tech teams, but they've been incredible and they're really doing it differently. So it's so nice to see they're in Kenya.
Yeah, I suppose it's quite difficult to actually say specifically. I know in South Africa, there are a few new startups that are starting to gain some traction. I think there's Data Profit, a lot of players in the sort of fintech space. But, what I'm also seeing in particular, I suppose some of the multinationals, like Deloitte, they do a lot of research around women in artificial intelligence, setting up these women communities. And in particular, I think something that they do quite well is starting to showcase some of the women role models in artificial intelligence. I think another company making a lot of strides is Accenture. So, again, it's a lot of the big names, but definitely we can see that new South African startups are starting to gain some traction. Also, I suppose, being quite attractive, also getting lots of investment. But even if I just think very simply, if I think of governments starting to use chatbots, robocallers, those kinds of things, we can see a lot more of that happening. I just think, when I submit my Discovery medical aid claim now, I can submit it on WhatsApp and I have a chatbot asking me different questions, etc. And so that's all starting to, show that artificial intelligence is being used in simple ways.
I would possibly add to that and say, from a country perspective, I think Estonia is doing quite a stellar job when it comes to implementation of AI. They kind of have been one of the very first adopters of it, and they have shown, it's been really successful in terms of even maintaining it. When we talk about startups, there's been quite a few that I've come across through Founder Institute, in terms of applications of it. I think one of the famous ones that we've all heard of during the pandemic was Zipline, and they basically use AI and drone technology to deliver medical equipment or medical vaccinations throughout the continent. So that was a real huge success story. And I guess, coming closer to home, there have been, as my fellow colleagues have mentioned, a few other startups within the space that's really attacking not only just AI as a core, but also data. And also I think kudos needs to be given to the regulators who's really kind of stepped up and said, yes, okay, we definitely gonna come along for the ride in terms of this, and placing digital identity at the forefront for us.
Sure, those are all really fantastic, and it's great to think about all of those applications. And I'm sure if I dedicated just an entire hour to chat about that, we could run through an entire laundry list of different organizations that are doing cool stuff, that are doing impactful stuff, that are doing creative stuff with the application of AI. I want to know, if we think about how we continue to use this, not just to make our lives more convenient, but to move society forward, we do need to think about how we make that ecosystem robust, but also how do we make sure that more people can play in that ecosystem. And I'm curious to find out from each of you, and I'll start with Lavina, and we can go back, go to Nikki, then Megan, is to find out, what is missing in the ecosystem? What are some of those key critical gaps that require our attention? And for somebody who's sitting at home and who goes, okay, I'm gonna make my move, and I'm gonna do this one little thing to make a difference, what are some of those different things that are required to make the ecosystem more inclusive, more adaptable, but also something can take all of us forward together?
Yeah, I love that question. So, I always give this scenario of conversations, simple conversations that start around a dinner table. That's as easy as it gets, right? So whether it's educating our grandparents or our parents or even just our siblings around the latest tech, or how it works, or, why does it work in a particular way, I think makes for great learning. In terms of where we've seen things kind of headed, I guess that landscape is quite large, and with the adoption that's happening at such a rapid race, get yourself involved in communities. So communities tend to really have a larger voice that then drive a particular outcome. So find things that actually resonate with your value system. That becomes key in terms of, what else? Immerse yourself in as many free courses that are out there and just keep learning, because learning never stops, no matter even the amount of gray hair you collect. So, yeah, I mean, I think, again, this is just such a huge one. Could you possibly remind me of the first part of your question?
Sure. It was just, where are some of the gaps in the ecosystem at the moment, and what could we do to bridge those gaps?
Okay, great. Yeah, so the gaps are definitely a huge one. I think we're seeing things of, obviously the bias that exists from a human perspective, the bias that exists from a developing perspective. We've also seen things like an ambition gap. Ambition gap is basically where, we may have the ability to do something, but we may not necessarily want to hold those titles as women. That is something that's becoming quite evident as well of late. I think, another gap is actually optimization of the youth and their skill. So I'll give you an example. The schooling system, I think, is something that needs to rapidly be adopted or, looked at in terms of being changed, because there's a lot more we could be doing with the youth, and there's a lot more we could be upskilling them with, from a knowledge-based perspective, to really start optimizing our sort of end goal. So thanks for that question.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's skills, knowledge is power. And so stronger awareness, just like Lavina mentioned, having those conversations. But what I also just want to stress, getting to understand artificial intelligence, demystify it, get to understand how it actually integrates in everyday life, doesn't mean you have to be a coder or, an expert in it. Because really, the power of artificial intelligence is also very dependent on domain knowledge and expertise. So if you are, for instance, a nurse in a clinic, or a teacher at a school, or a farmer, an emerging farmer, your domain knowledge is extremely important in order to get artificial intelligence to work well in that domain. So I think for me, it's about saying, don't make assumptions that artificial intelligence is just for the techies and the software developers and the computer scientists. It's really about saying, in our everyday lives, with ordinary work that we are doing, how do we just, start asking the questions and really explore how artificial intelligence can make our lives better, obviously improve our lives, and we do want to progress as humankind, but how do we use it to our advantage? And so I think just that curiosity is important. I think government is starting to look at, for instance, how do we start introducing robotics and coding at school level, so that we really, from an early stage, start exploring these. I know we have a national skills strategy from the Department of Communications that's quite important. There's a presidential commission on the fourth industrial revolution. The CSIR has also set up a center for the fourth industrial revolution. So I think small things are starting to happen. And it's just a matter of how we start pulling these all together, creating the synergies and the integration. And then I'm sure we will see tremendous progress.
Following on from Nikki, I mean, we think the context and domain knowledge and just understanding, what you're building is really important. And we feel that the builders of the technology should be similar to the users of the technology. And we've tried really hard at Zindi to, really include people from everywhere in terms of, how we build and how we solve data challenges. We've achieved 26% females on our platform. We have about 38,000 data practitioners on Zindi. We have representation in almost every African country. But that 26% is actually high, but we've really pushed hard. And I think part of it is working with people in the space of people that are highly skilled. There's still a lot of intimidation, feeling like they don't belong and feeling like it's not a place for them. We have to try. I mean, all of us, I think we have to try really, really hard to include more people and make people feel welcome. We've run female-only hackathons and data challenges, which have been very successful. I think, it's still an intimidating space. And I think we all have to think, how do we make it more inclusive every single day? And, I would, I want to see 50%. I think we're not going to stop until we get 50%, but it's hard. And it's, I think, something that we all have to work with and work towards every day.
Thanks, Megan. And I think that does require deliberate effort. If we're bringing everybody along, we need to think about how do we do that and what are the different things we put in place that make sure that everyone can come along on the journey with us. And there's a question here from Kirsten, which leads into what I was going to ask next. So she says, hi, women. I encourage girls to pursue STEM careers, but what she wants to know is how can I practically encourage them in AI in terms of resources to spark their interest, and that's that's the next section that I want to discuss before we wrap up is, we're talking about AI, but AI sits in the field of STEM, and do you still see a lot of gender gaps within the STEM industry as it pertains to women participating in that space? And what can we do specifically to close the gap for women? And I think this question from Kirsten as well, maybe just speaking to any resources that are available that you could suggest that is a great place to kind of spark that interest and get people going in terms of starting with AI, but also just generally in the broader scheme of STEM careers. Megan, I'll come to you.
Thank you. I think it's. Oh, there's an echo on the line. Thanks, Nsiki. I think it's, it's a visibility. So having, female mentors, having females in the space, making sure that they're included, and it's quite basic, but it's also really hard to do. I think that, it's, for what we do, we try with visibility, and I think it has been successful. But I'll leave it to some other ideas.
Yeah, just an example that we used recently is we had a strategic planning session at the MLab. Actually half of our staff are women, but definitely the knowledge of this field of AI is still dominated by the males. But, a portion of our strategic session was actually dedicated to, well, tell us what this is about in layman's terms, tell us about blockchain. How do we actually practically integrate it into, the work that we're doing? How do we also digitize our own operations? So it's one thing talking about this and teaching it, but how do we actually live it in our organization? And also what we're doing is almost proactively creating little modules that we can take to schools, to the ecosystem development type workshops and boot camps, and almost really proactively going after programs that say, well, actually we're targeting women, we're targeting young girls in rural communities. And one of the things I love to preach is that, we're all going to be the users of those technologies. On the one hand, we are building these new businesses that are creating and developing artificial intelligence, developing these products and services. But on the other hand, you need to almost prime a market of users that are actually going to want to buy those products and technologies. And so for me, even the spaza shop in a rural community needs to be made aware of it. Because are you going to be using these systems, etc. And so it really is about demystifying, creating the awareness. And I think there's also a lot of free courses that one can do. I can't think offhand now, but I know that one can do these, so many hours worth of training on artificial intelligence. The CSIR is launching something called a learning factory that they're wanting to put into TVET colleges. And so I really think that there is effort being put into creating more resources and tools that people can use and get access to. But, I think it just is a matter of creating the access and awareness, and hopefully that spark leads to a fire.
So I'd piggyback off that one and say, the next gravitation or next phase within AI is definitely around open AI. And there are, lots of things that are free, that are accessible in terms of you being able to, for example, utilize a GAN, play around with it, see what it's all about, and figure all of that. Similarly, courses like, I think it's Deep Learning AI, they offer quite a few courses in terms of getting started with artificial intelligence. But I think equally so, the famous names like Udemy and Carissa, are the ones that are the first go-to sort of places for it. In terms of as we were having this conversation, it actually just reminded me, within the Africa context, we had 7 unicorns last year. Out of that, we had an investment of about 5 billion, right? And none of them out of the top 7 were actually female. So that's something that still speaks volumes in terms of the work and the effort that's still needed. And let's not undermine it. We're not done yet.
I think what we see is some of the constraints are still very basic. So, just access to compute power, access to electricity. I mean, we're working across so many communities across Africa, and sometimes it's just such basics like that are actually still a struggle for people. So I think we have to bear in mind, just access to computing is something that, we need to kind of get over.
I completely agree with you, Megan. That was going to be my next question, to say from a practical application perspective, it's a great example that Luvina shared there, but how many communities actually do have access? If we also think about the cost of data, are we at a stage where everyone can practically or physically actually jump on the bandwagon because of those basic constraints that exist? And, are there great movements that are happening that are seeking to break those barriers? So from a top end, I often see a lot of investment around those great innovations and new solutions and so forth. But do we see an equal amount of investment at a grassroots level that's just focused on making sure that people have the laptops, people have the connectivity, and people just have those basic resources to be able to plug in and connect?
Yeah, I think that's an awesome question, but I'd actually push back a little bit on that, in terms of saying we've seen, for example, ICT centers being set up in rural communities, and they only last for maybe a month at most, before they get completely demolished. But having said that, we equally have citizens, digital citizens that kind of really are just taking the forefront and tackling and solving problems. So for example, I think it was about 8 years ago, I came across a 16-year-old that literally developed an app for his grandmom who was running a farm, and this was in Ghana. And he actually went to the extent of negotiating with the telcos to actually give them stuff at zero cost, which he ended up doing. So things are very much achievable, within the space. Equally so, I think when we see the merging of blockchain and AI, we even have technology that is already available within the continent, where people can open up a crypto wallet without having access to the internet using simple USSD. So I think, as much as we keep going back to, yes, we don't have access, equally so, we've seen a rise in mobile money. We've seen a rise in terms of usage of mobile. And there's a lot more solutions that are driven in terms of that without having that connectivity. But still, one of the main huge problems is electricity. I think that still remains.
Thanks, Amina, for highlighting that perspective. It's really great to know that those kinds of interventions are taking place. And I think maybe the point of consideration when you speak about ICT learning centers being set up but not lasting long is also mindfulness that, and I think this goes back to a question that was asked earlier on about how do you get into the space where you don't come from a tech background, is to think about how do you partner. So if we're going into spaces where people are still battling with housing, battling with healthcare, battling with whatever basic human needs that there are, is that people will kind of latch onto whatever new thing is happening and go, we demand these services, therefore, maybe this thing doesn't become a success in that area, and kind of going, how do we bring in those new innovations, but also let people know that they are seen holistically and that there's something that's being done about meeting their basic needs. And that need for basic services as well. I think another question that I want to ask before we wrap up is, and maybe I'll put this to Nikki, but Megan and Lavina, you're most welcome to comment on this. Is sometimes when I look at generally, AI and blockchain and just tech in general from a Western perspective, I often think that the West innovates for convenience. So it's like, how do we cut down your shopping time online, or how do we make your shopping experience more fun, or all these nice interactive plug-in things that make your life more great, which isn't necessarily the experience of, I suppose, 80% of people living in the world. Is that approach different from an African context? Are we innovating for convenience, or do you see a trend where there's an innovation for livelihood, and there's innovations around those key aspects that make up the Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, now I think, in Africa, we have so many challenges, and I think a lot of innovation comes from out of necessity and wanting to change the kind of situation we are in. If I just use an example, one of the companies that we are currently supporting, Medisol, is actually a doctor, very familiar with oncology and cancer, and she actually created a solution based on artificial intelligence to help with almost the detection of breast cancer, but actually in a way that the system can be used in rural clinics, for instance, so that you actually don't need an oncologist to be in these clinics. You could use the system there, get a nurse or a sister to use the system, help with early detection, but then refer that up to an actual hospital if need be. So really, her solution came out of saying, how do we reduce the burden on the healthcare system? How do we ensure that where there's early diagnosis, this can be referred to hospitals sooner rather than later? And so that's just an example where it really is coming from necessity. With a lot of, the youth, we have a huge youth unemployment in the country currently. And I think the one thing about youth is that they're born into this digital nation. Their phone is almost attached to their hips. They're onto social media. And so for them, they're quite excited about being able to actually use these new technologies to actually solve problems that they're experiencing in their communities. Another quick example is we have a company called Dropper, who really identified the problem with, just moving household items from one place to another at a reasonable cost, and almost at the touch of an app. And so they've developed that solution to help with, transportation and logistics. So I think it is necessity driven in on the continent rather than just for the luxurious use of technology to make our lives simpler.
Cool. I don't know if Megan or Lavina, if either of you has anything that you'd like to add to that, but I am mindful that our time is almost wrapping up. So I'll give you the opportunity to add anything if you want to in my last question, which is, we've spoken about AI, we've spoken about the gaps that exist, we've spoken about the ecosystem, and my key takeaway is the fact that it's possible. It's possible for women to participate. It's possible for women to become the majority, and because the space is still growing, it's possible for women to kind of step in and be the leaders. And it's really just, how do we integrate? How do we create ecosystems? How do we partner and support one another in order to be able to get there? So as you being women leaders, innovators, creators in your spaces, I would like to know, what is your one power her? So when you show up somewhere, when you think about yourself in the space that you exist in, what's the one thing that you like? Because this is my power her, and this helps me make a difference in the world. Megan, let's start with you.
That's an interesting question. I think I have a very scientific mind, so that's what I generally bring to interactions, but also calmness. So there can be a storm around me and I'll still be pretty calm and logical about everything. So I'd say that's my superpower.
I love it. Nikki, then Lavina.
Yeah, I suppose it's just genuinely caring about people, whether engaging with a student who's just recently graduated, or the chairperson of a board. It's just to bring everybody down to my level. This is who I am, speak confidently, but also build that, interpersonal relationship with the person, because that's when the conversations can start, and that's when the networking can happen. And if you just think of that person as, someone from next door that you should just have the conversation with, never lose that opportunity to start having it.
So for me, I think it's very much, as you introduced me initially, was around being a conscious creator. So for me, it is very much being present in the moment at that time. I think this is something even my twin girls will tell you that I drill into them, is that we literally only have this nanosecond, and this is all that counts, right? So, we have a choice at every single point in time. So every nanosecond you have a choice. Every nanosecond you could be a different version. You could be a different, wherever you want to get to, because that idea of having months or years to kind of achieve something is far long gone. And especially being women in the tech space, I think it is so crucial that we kind of just really keep with that momentum. And therefore, it's so key in terms of, speaking up, showing up, and supporting up every nanosecond of every day. So, yeah.
I like that. Changing your life and making those decisions a nanosecond at a time. That's absolutely fantastic. Lavina Ramikson, Nikki Kubanali, and Megan Yates, thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights with us. I see everyone's joined us from different parts of the world, and I'm sure they'd love to pick your brain further, but we really appreciate the afternoon that you've given us to just dig a little deeper into AI and understand what that looks like for our future. Thank you so much to each of you. I'd like to welcome back to our virtual screen our partners for this event. And I know the Women in Tech Philippi branch launched something that's really fantastic in helping women. So maybe Melissa wants to speak a little bit about that. And Nadia is working on, or they have already launched a fund and they're looking to support women. So I'll also give Nadia an opportunity to speak about that before we wrap up. Over to you, Melissa.
Oh, thank you, Natiki. And it was such a great conversation. I really loved the different perspectives of each of the ladies and what you brought to the table. I think you mentioned access is a problem. So obviously that led me just to kind of jump off my seat and be like, hey, we've got a solution, or at least a start of a solution. We're piloting projects in Philippi Village, which is right in the heart of the Cape Flats. It's in between Nyanga, Mandalay, Crossroads, Philippi, and Guguletu. And it's a wonderful business center that is very safe. When I say safe, I mean I go there once a week. I meet with lots of kids and schools from the area, and it's a free IT learning center for kids that want to come and learn IT skills. So we are hoping to have a successful pilot so that we can open more of these centers throughout South Africa. So at the moment, we're in Cape Town, and we're working with other partners in the area to do specific coding projects. We're working with robotics projects, so that's to teach robotics skills. And the other comments I just wanted to make, it was really inspired by a book by Mo Gaudat. Sorry, he's a very much an AI specialist, Google X MD. I don't know if you know Mo, but he's written a book called Scary Smart, which is basically highlighting the fact that AI is eventually going to take over the world of work and the world as we know it, I guess. And it's so important to understand what that means in terms of the future generation, the world of work for our kids, how they should prepare for a future of work that, we don't even know what it looks like yet. So, and what he mentions is how important curiosity is, how important it is to continuously always learn, because even our jobs might change. So the continuous learning bit, is definitely centered to how we will probably be working in the future. Is always staying curious and hopefully inspiring some others along the way. But from a women in tech perspective, we really want to bridge the gender gap, and we're doing it through action like these centers that we're building, and with your help of raising awareness, inspiring, and I love this event, and thank you so much for being part of this month's Power Her. Over to you, Nadia.
Thanks so much, Mal. Actually, Melissa told me about, she sent me a link to Mo Gaudat's series, it was a podcast from Stephen Bartlett. It's on Spotify, The Diary of a CEO. It's episode 101. I have listened to it. It's 2 hours long, but I've listened to it probably 6 times in a week. Because there are such key elements that I need to sit with for a while and really think about the world around me. So thanks, Melissa, for that recommendation. And he does talk about his book, Solve for Happy, because actually he worked out a happiness equation, which has also helped. And then he speaks about Scary Smart and how happiness and AI can go hand in hand, but we as individuals need to teach the AI the ethics. And right now, if we leave it up to humanity and idiocracy, it's not going to have the best outcome. So it really is important that, when we're swiping, when we're watching, when we're doing that, it's positive content and good content, and really share the kindness. Was the message I got from it. And another book that I'm reading at the moment is also called The Invisible Woman, which is about the data gender gap, which also feeds into the AI conversation. But I just want to thank everybody, Lavina, Megan, Nikki, and you too, Nsiki, for such an amazing session. It was really engaging. I learned a lot. And Seed South Capital, we are launching a venture fund, and we're hoping to change the status quo of investment on the continent. We're working with key partners who have a great track record of post-investment management and working with female entrepreneurs. And I would say my ask at the end would be, if you are a startup, male or female, and you have a solution to the gaps that have been spoken about today, be it connectivity, be it electricity, be it data, please inbox me. And subject Power Her, that makes it easier for me to scroll and have a look through LinkedIn, and my email I'll put up as well. So yeah, hopefully Seed South Capital can make a difference. We will make a difference, and it's sessions like this that really make me optimistic and passionate about the youth in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Melissa and Nadia. And I will ask everyone that you please do connect with them via LinkedIn if you want to participate and support either of those two projects. And looking at our panel today, wrapping up our conversation, reflecting on some of the insights shared here today, I think this for me speaks to the theme for this year's International Women's Day, which is on the 8th of March. And it's still being March, we're still celebrating women everywhere. And the theme for this year was, or is rather, breaking bias. And I look at this panel of women who are doing fierce, phenomenal, amazing stuff in AI and just generally in tech, and I go that we are definitely breaking the bias. This is the future. These are the leaders, but this is also the women that are making the path for other young girls and women to come along and to dominate the AI and tech space. And if nothing else, go find a lady, support her, mentor her, and let us make sure that more women are able to start businesses, create initiatives and innovations that change the world through technology. My name is Ntigi Mkhize. It's been an absolute pleasure hosting you, and thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Power Her Africa series, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers.